just a touching a relationship or occurrence right there that took place. And so we looked at that, and then we see that they have some breakfast that's already prepared for them, and they eat. And again, why did we do that? Why does it include that? That's right, to show that it's physically Jesus raised from the dead. It wasn't some glorified body. It wasn't some hallucination. It was really Jesus in the flesh, okay? I would like, in a perfect world, that you knew the book of John so well that if I said, or asked the question, how many fishes were in the net when they, drew it in, you could tell me. And what's the number there? It's up there. Now, is that important that you know the number? But wouldn't it be nice if you knew it that well? Now, there's other things that are more important, like the 7 signs that are recorded in the book of John. I really would want you to know those, and because they're all given so that we might believe that Jesus is the Christ. And so the study of the Bible is not just for academic purpose. It's so we can first incorporate it in our own life and use it, and then we can share it with others. And we can't share well what we don't know well. And so it'd be nice that any time, if I just threw out a word like wine, where's that found? First time. Yeah, and what chapter, Eva? That's good. All right, she's starting off the new year right. And so how about bread? Feeding 5,000. Where else? In John?
Oh, in John?
Yeah, John. How about Jesus said, I am the... Oh, yeah, see, there's many places we're going to find a bread. How about body or flesh? Flesh. Unless Jesus said, unless you drink my blood and eat my flesh. So, well, what does that mean? Well, you should know those things and know where they're found. That's in John chapter 6, when he said, he is the bread of life. And so it would be nice that you knew John so well, because you've read it so many times, that you could just remember those like that. And you say, well, that's impossible. It's funny because I haven't lived in John Day, Oregon since 1982 or 3. Well, I'm talking about going back out of high school. No, it was actually 78. But I remember my phone number from John Day, Oregon. 503, didn't have a 503, but it's 5750733. How come you remember that for those many? Well, I guess it was important, but repetition. Yeah, now you just push a button, but yeah, you had to use it. If we were using it, we would remember these things, all right? So you can do it if we just work at it, yes?
I think the fish on 153 is significant. And it's significant in that these were fishermen, and they know when they cast their nets, they didn't get them full like that.
No, this is a big catch. That's right. Exactly. Okay. So that takes us into the breakfast on the beach, and then we finish that. But now where Jesus addresses Peter. This is the touching scene. So let's read it, then we'll talk about it. So we're in John chapter 21, and we'll start there in verse 15. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, so he turns to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? To which Peter replies, he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, well, tend my lambs. Verse 16, he said to him again a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, well, shepherd my sheep. So verse 17, now a third time, He says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, tend to my sheep. Now, rightfully, a lot is made of this encounter with Jesus dialogue because it goes back to, well, several things, but what's the first thing it goes back to in your mind? What does it jump to? Three denials. And see the parallel, because Peter vowed, devotion to Christ. And he said, I don't care if all the other disciples desert you. I'll never desert you. I'll even die for you. And Jesus said, oh, Peter, before the night's finished and the cock crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. And that's exactly what happened, we find, at the crucifixion or his trial. And so now Jesus, when he appears to the 12, or the group here, has this breakfast, and they're sitting around, and I know there's lots of questions, lots of discussion going on, but who does he address? Who does he turn his attention to? Now, is this a rebuke?
No, I think it's more to reinstate to him the importance of following Jesus and reinstating the fact and bringing to his memory as well as the fact that he did deny him 3 times.
Okay.
And then to just reinstate, Peter, do you love me? The more he needs to be focused.
Okay. All right, that happens. Yes.
Well, I think he was instilling in them that, yeah, you have the love for Jesus, but the purpose was his lambs. Purpose was, if you love me enough, you'll teach me to everyone else.
Okay. Yes, Wayne.
I presume you're going to get into the differences that they were really having in the conversation, because one was saying one thing and the
Right.
other was saying the other.
Right. Yes, Phoebe.
So wouldn't Peter have known from Jesus saying love that it was a different meaning?
Yeah, because in the Greek, that's what Wayne's referring to. We'll address that in a second. But when you've let someone down, when you've hurt them, what's the most difficult thing to do next? When you've really hurt someone, betrayed them, let them down. Well, what in a timeline, what's the most next difficult thing? I'm reaching, huh? The first time you have to be with them and address the issue. All right? Because we know when there's problems in a relationship, you avoid people. Isn't that easy to do? I don't want to see that person because then we'll have to talk about it. And it's the elephant in the room, right? Is there an elephant in the room here that Jesus talks about immediately? Yeah, let's talk about your denial of me. But does he bring up the denial at all? No. Not at all. And that's what I want to show you, that Jesus had this intimate relationship with the 12, especially the 3, Peter, James, and John. Who did he take up on the mountain with him? Peter, James, and John. Peter was very important to him, and he gave him the keys of the kingdom, said, you're going to open the door to the kingdom. He had this relationship, and Peter vowed this devotion to him, severely let him down, as well as the rest. And we're seeing that after the death, burial, and resurrection now, Jesus is not going to hold it against him. Nothing's changed. He's reaffirming this relationship, but he's drawing him more closely to what, a discipleship is all about. And I think there's so much hope in this. I don't know how much you've let the Lord down, but I've let him down in my life. And one of the things that Satan uses about guilt and shame is to keep you from going back to the Lord. Is that not true? When there's sin in your life, what's the most difficult thing to do as a Christian on this earth? But praying to God. Why is that so hard? Yeah, because you feel guilty. Even if you have acknowledged it and you already know it's wrong, is it hard to go to God? And should it be difficult? Yeah, there should be a contriteness, a brokenness, but it's very difficult. So can you imagine the spiritual tension, emotional tensions going on in this discourse? But is it necessary? Absolutely. So we do this in our marriage class, and so I just want you to see the diagram because it's true for our spiritual growth as well. Everyone wants in a marriage intimacy. And when we have intimacy, everything's great, right? And we could talk about what that means. But everything works. You know, you're one flesh, one mind, one spirit, everything's fine. What do you want? No, what do you want? Oh, everything's perfect, right? You know, and you're just smiling happy. It's like two newlyweds. And it's like, oh, it's so sweet, but it's sickening sweet too at the same time. But when do you want that to go away? And the saddest thing when you hear young people say, yeah, I look at my parents or I look at older folks that are married and they're just like roommates because this has been lost. God doesn't want it to be gone, but does every relationship have this C word that's called conflict? It does, right? And every relationship cycles between intimacy and conflict. If you get stuck down here, you have problems. But does every relationship, you have issues that come up, you got to resolve. And that's life because you're messing two minds, two souls together. And they're not always on the same page. And of course, most conflict can be dealt with. And most is short term. And making up is one of the best parts about conflict, right? Because you get to go back to intimacy and actually you're better off than you were before the conflict, because now one of the things that kept you separated has been resolved, right? Now, the third stage in marriage, the worst one is withdrawal. Withdrawal is when you can't deal with conflict anymore, and so there's a separation of the spirits, the two persons. This is an open relationship, open spirit. This is a closed one. And we close it because I don't want to be hurt anymore. Right? This is when you have divorce. Now, I say all that because when we do any type of marriage work with a couple that when there's been serious conflict or sin in their life and they're in withdrawal, can you get back to intimacy? And the answer is yes. But do you get back to intimacy by circumventing with the conflict? Just go like, let's do an end around. Go right back here. Let's let bygones be gone and forget about it like it never happened. Does that ever work in a relationship? So, well, that's healthy. You know, no, it's not. Because it'll haunt you later. Now, granted, there are some things you just have to they're not worth the effort. You know, petty things. But I'm talking about serious problems of relationship. You can't just turn your back on them. The way to get back to intimacy is to go right back through the conflict and resolve it. Then you're going to have true intimacy. So why do I say all this? Can you imagine God trying to become one with us? Here, he is someone that doesn't think like us. His thoughts are so above ours. His ways are so above ours. And here we are on this earth just following our own desires, troubling God and causing so much conflict in the world and in our relationship with him. How difficult it is for us to have a relationship. But yet that's what he wants us to be, one, right? One with him, just as Christ and him are one. Is there conflict in our relationship with God as we're walking on this earth? Yes. But will he ever withdraw from us? No. Never. As long as we work through the conflict and get back to him. Now, sometimes we withdraw, don't we? Because of guilt or just lust or desires of the world, whatever it is. But I want to show that you can always get back into the right relationship with God, but you got to work through the problems that cause you to drift away to begin with. There's no circumventing them. You don't just forget about them. And that's what Jesus is doing here. Peter, let's deal with this. But I have to love how he deals with it. It's not beating him over the head. Why did you do that? No. Jesus already knew he was going to deny him, didn't he? So he didn't have to beat him up over the head because Peter's already beaten himself up. Because what did he do after the cock crew? Wept, but he was a broken man. And that's not the time to squash out a person. It's the time, okay, let's work through this. Okay?
Okay, Judas is the poster child of not doing it right.
That's right.
His shame drove him to,
We call that self-loathing. Judas was so remorseful, but it's the opposite of self-righteous, and it's just as bad because it's all about self. He was self-loathing and went out and hung himself. Peter has the right attitude. He's a broken person, no longer self-righteous. I'll never deny you. Isn't that a little self-righteous? He's broken now, but he doesn't go to the point of self-loathing. Is that a problem in our society or people? I'm not worthy. I'll never be good enough. I never can do this. Poor me. Self-loathing. And that's an insult to God, isn't it? Because it's all about you rather than what he's going to do for you. And if we trust in him, we're going to be able to pick ourselves up or be picked up. So here's where Jesus addresses Peter. When we look at it, first thing he says, do you love me? Then he adds the statement, more than these. The question is, who are the more than these? Now, it'd be easy to jump, well, more. Do you love me more than these other apostles love me? And that's possible. But what was Peter when Jesus first called him? What has he gone back to? Fishing. So it could be more than this lifestyle, these fish and everything. Do you love me more than this? Either way, the crux of the question is, what do you really feel and think about me? Do you really love me? That's what he's asking. And the word that he uses is the word agape. And that's interesting because when Peter says, Lord, you know that I love you, he uses the word phileo. And say, well, what's the difference? In English, we use one word, love, for 4 different concepts. We use it for family love, oh, I love you, or brotherly love, because do you tell people that are not family, but in the church family, hey, I love you, guy. Hey, love you, Gary. All right? Now, some people can't do that. They can't. They just don't express it. I think this congregation is great about that. You hear about that. Because should we love one another? 1 Peter 2 says we're born again for this purpose. We've been redeemed for this purpose, to fervently love one another. There's romantic love. And we say, oh, I love you. Would I say that to Gary? No. And then there's erotic love. And we use the same English word. In fact, we say making love, right? But the highest form of love that when it says in 1 John chapter 4, God is love, he uses the agape word. Is it emotional? People say, well, no, it's not. No, it is emotional. If there's not emotion in this love, you're not going to love like God does. God so loved the world that he gave. Why? Because he was desperately concerned for them. Compassion, and he wanted to do something because here is the people made in his likeness, his offspring, and he wants to rescue them. If there's not emotion in there, you're never going to act. But it's the highest form because you can love your enemies because it transcends just liking because we're family and because we have common interests. It's because I see the value in you as a created person in the image of God. And so I can set aside the evil that you do and I'll love you. Did Jesus love his enemies? Yeah. That's the agape word. So he says, Peter, do you agape me? Lord, you know I like you. See, like would be the closest to the phileo. We're buddies. I mean, we've went through a lot, 3 years, right? And does Jesus say, no, I didn't say phileo, I said agape. Does he chastise him? Does he prod him, No, he says, feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. Now, that's an interesting answer, and we'll come back to it in a second. So the second time, when he says, do you love me? And he says, you know I love you. Jesus used the word agape again, and Peter says, phileo. In response, This time Jesus says, well, shepherd my sheep. This is the word shepherd that is we use normally for a shepherd out in the field. Now, one of the jobs of a shepherd is to feed the sheep, but it's a different word. The first time he said actually feed them. Now it's shepherd them, which would include what? Feeding, protecting, leading them. You're in charge of them. Help them. All right? So lead my sheep. It's distinct from feeding. Now the second time, is this going to be, how do you think if you were Peter that you would respond to this? Like the first time is, ouch, yeah, you Lord, you know I love you. And he comes back a second, Peter, do you love me? Lord, you know and he goes, phileo. Is it got to hurt? Because he knows he's denied him 3 times. But this is the way he's working through the conflict of the 3 denials. By asking him 3 times, do you love me? So here's the third one. When he said, Simon, son of John. It's interesting. He refers to him as the Simon, the son of a man. Because what did Peter do when Jesus asked, who do you say that I am? Peter said, you're not a man. You are the son of God, the Christ. And Jesus said, blessed are you, son of Bar-Jonah, or son of a man, because you just called me the son of a God. That's back in Matthew 16. And I think he's drawing upon that again when he says, Simon, you son of a man, do you love me, the son of God? Right? And Peter was grieved. Now this word here, grieved, is broken. It's this bitterness like, Lord, you know. It's similar to when he grieved and wept bitterly. This is hurtful to him because he's going right to the core of his conflict. Because why did Peter, at the bottom line, why did he deny Christ? Fear of life. And I'll give you that, but I think there's something even more intrinsic to why. Started it out, didn't know what was going on, but there's something more than that. He didn't what?
He didn't want to be, there was the association.
No, there's something more. It's up there. He didn't love him. Isn't that right? Even if you didn't understand, but you loved him, would you die for him? Would you just stay with him to the bitter end? So I don't get this, but I love you so much, I will not deny you. I'm going to stick by you. It really comes down to a matter of, Peter, do you love me? Because he didn't love Jesus enough at one time, did he? Now, of course, the greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength. Your very person. And really, that's the essence of discipleship. That I'm going to love you because I know that's how you love me. And that's intimacy then. That's pure, the intimacy we're all looking for. Yes?
There, in the first one, he says, or my lambs.
Uh-huh.
And the other 2, he says, my sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a translation difference, or is there actually word difference?
That's a good question, and I didn't look at that. Let me go back. And I know someone has, here it says lambs, and that's a little sheep, right? And then here it says sheep, and then it says sheep. And I'd have to look at the Greek to see, but it's probably one is lamb and the other one's probably sheep. But I'm going to guess, but I can't answer that. It's a good question. Yeah. But aren't we all like little sheep? And we need loving, right? So if you love me, please love these sheep of mine, right? Yes.
The first one is the word for lamb, and the second one is is one Greek word, the second one is a second Greek word, and the third one is,
The
same
same as the second.
So bottom is the sheep one, and then there's a second
All right.
word is lamb. So he specifically said lamb the first time and sheep the second.
All right. So that's why we love smart apps. You know, so it was lamb, then sheep, sheep. Okay? Yes.
With that too, when Peter started out as one of the chosen 12, he was like
Yeah.
He was in his infancy, and Christ was educating him.
He's been raising them, right?
Then he became that sheep, and finally at the end, he's telling him what he needs to do. This
That's right.
is what I did with you. This is now what you need to do.
Good. That's a good observation. Yes.
Whether it be sheep or man, wouldn't it encompass everything?
Yes. It ends up still being the same. Although they're baby sheep that need more attention because they're baby, and then there's older sheep. But yeah, we all need it. Yes.
Jack, I guess I got a question. Why do you think Jesus dropped to the phileo level at the third time? Is it more to help Peter?
Oh, all right. That's good.
Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you even like me?
So the question is, Peter has been answering, do you agape me with the answer, yes, I phileo you. This time, Jesus asked him, actually, do you really even phileo me? That's what he's asking. He's tying into what Peter, so I think he's cutting to the crux of the matter why I asked, why did Peter desert him? It's because it's a matter of love. So agape love is a higher form. It says, you need to re-examine, do you even have this familial, this natural bond between us because of being brothers? Do you even have that? See? And he's challenging him. And is it healthy for us all to look at our life and ask, how much do I really love Jesus? How much do I really love God? Is it just something that, as long as it works and there's no conflict and it's convenient for me, I'm glad to follow him? Or does it transcend? Because that's not real love, is it? You know, love is being willing to take a bullet for your family or throw yourself in front of a car to save a child. Do we do that for our children just naturally, instinctively? Don't even think about it. Well, that's what Jesus did for us. So he's saying, do you really love me? And so he comes back and says, you know all things. Is that true? And he says, you know that I love you. Did Peter love Jesus?
Yes.
Yes. Phileo him. Did he struggle in exercising that? Yes.
But I think if you look at his life as he advanced from that point, it turned into an agape love.
That's right. And for all of us, it's a process. And so I love this discussion from several points. Is that he had to deal with the conflict and get back through it, but he didn't beat him up over it. And it's so healthy for us to understand when you're dealing with Christians who are fallen in sin, this is the approach you should take. When they're already broken and remorseful, you don't have to beat them over the head. Just get them back to a love of Christ and reaffirm that God loves them. And let's move forward. Let's be more dedicated. Let's be more committed. And feed my sheep. Don't look back. And Jesus still has the same relationship that he did before than now that he does after, even though there is all this terribleness in between. Actually, it's deeper now, isn't it? Because they understand what's going on. So I think I hit that. The word grieve is this emotional pain and sadness, as you can imagine it would be. All right, so any questions about that? Yes, Gary.
Not a question, but I think this applies really hard to the church because if we don't have intimacy between each other, then when the conflict comes up, we can't sit down and settle.
That's right. If we really have love for one another, agape and phileo, we could deal with any conflict, couldn't we? But the reason churches have problems and brethren have problems is because we don't have that Jesus is asking for, right? And he's very strong about it. If you can't love your brother whom you do see, don't tell me you love God who you can't see. That's 1 John chapter 4. And so the way we show love for God is by showing it first here, right? Good point. Okay. So then this comes up some really curious questions about Peter's future, what's going to happen to him? And he's going to die as a martyr. So really it has to deal with the coming future persecution. Verse 18, truly I say to you, when you were younger, talking to Peter, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wish. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will gird you and bring you where you do not wish to go. Now at first blush you might think, well, yeah, a young child, he'd gather up his loins and run around the hills and do whatever he wanted. But when you get older, you're going to be so feeble, someone else is going to have to help you. Is that what it's saying? No, because notice the last statement there. They'll bring you where you do not wish to go. You used to go where you wanted. Now you're going to go where you don't want to go. Now he said this. Here's John's explanation, so we make sure we understand it. Signifying what kind of death he would glorify God. Signifying, foretelling, you're going to die a martyr's death for me. You're going to be killed for your faith. Now, the second thing I want you to see, and it would be amazing enough to know that you're going to die in that way. Would that be hard to deal with if you got that announcement? That would be hard. But here's the flip side. This death is how you're going to. You can't miss that. This is not a defeat. And even though it's going to be terrible, and even though you once said you would die for me, and you didn't follow through on it, it's going to be asked of you again, and this will be your opportunity, Peter, to show your love for me and glorify God by dying for what you truly believe in. You see that? And that death brings glory to God because you are true to him, the one you loved.
Even signifies what kind of death, like the stretching out of his hands, same as Jesus'
That's right.
hands were stretched out.
Now, tradition says that when Peter ended his life on this earth, he was crucified, and he requested, I'm not worthy to be crucified by like my Lord, crucify me upside down. Now, there's no reason not to believe it, but we don't know that for certain. But very similar to what happened to Jesus. Now, after giving this shocking, dismaying information, what's the only two words Jesus said to do to make sure you get there and stay faithful? Just follow me. Now, you have to go all the way back to Matthew chapter 16. It's recorded in Luke. Jesus said, if you want to be a disciple of mine, here's what you got to do. If anyone wants to follow me, here's what you got to do. Deny yourself, pick up your cross daily, and then come follow me. And then when he asked the disciples, who do you say that I am? And Peter said, well, thou art the Christ, Son of the living God. He went on to tell them about what's going to have to happen to him. He says, oh, really? Well, let me tell you what's going to happen to me. I got to go to Jerusalem. I got to suffer many things. I'm going to be killed. Lord, he rebuked Jesus. Lord, didn't you just hear what I said? You're the Christ, the Son of God. These things will never happen to you, Lord. Can you imagine Peter rebuking Jesus? And what did Jesus say? Get behind me, Satan. Because you're not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's interests. See, Jesus saying, this is tough enough already. I got to follow God, and I got to go through this cross to get back to God and do his will. So I don't need to hear you telling me that this doesn't have to happen. Now, what has he done to Peter? Said exactly the same thing. You're going to die for your faith in me. You're the one that confessed that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Someone's going to take you to where you don't want to go, and it's going to be terrible. You're going to die a martyr's death. And none of this, it's not God, rebuking someone saying that it shouldn't happen. But here's the only instruction I have for you, Peter. What is it? Just follow me. Don't look back. Just follow me. And that's really the answer to get through anything. Just set your eyes on Jesus and follow him. Because you love him and you trust him.
I was just going to say, in those two words are that God is, I'm with you.
I'm with you.
I'm with you to your last breath.
That's right.
If you're following me, that means I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And so it can be said, wherever Jesus' feet led him, if we're following Jesus, his footsteps will lead us to the same place. If he found joy on this earth, will it lead us to joy? Yes. If his footsteps led him to eat with sinners and people that really needed help, will it lead us to the same kind of people? Yes. If it led Jesus to humiliation and persecution, following Jesus will lead us to the same thing in some manner or form. But our job is just what? Just follow him. Yes.
So Satan can come through you that fast. Somebody that, like Peter, who loved God so much, he could come through and say, no, you're not going to die. I won't have it.
Okay. All right. That's a good question, all three. She asked, does Satan come that fast? Now notice how Jesus is being challenged that he didn't have to die. Did Satan talk to him directly? He used Peter, a man.
Right.
So where did Peter get this idea? Did Satan just infiltrate his mind?
Yeah, that fast.
No, that's not what happened then. So this is why I'm glad you asked it. But Peter, being a person of the world, thinks like the world and doesn't think like God. Now, who's the God of this world? Satan. And so when you buy into the world's values and its standards, Peter doesn't understand it. God's will was for Jesus to die. He's thinking like a man. And so when it comes down to it, great people get served. They don't get destroyed. So he's thinking like the world thinks. So that's why Jesus says, you're acting on Satan's behalf, telling me I don't have to do this because I have to. All right? So that's fine. And so anytime a voice tells you, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that for Christ. That's not fair. Is that God talking to you or is Satan talking to you? And it might come through another person. So someone does you something really wrong. And there's conflict in your relationship with that person. And they come and ask, they want forgiveness. So I'm not going to forgive them. And you say, I don't know. And someone says, you don't have to forgive them. After what they did to you, I'd never forgive them. Who's talking to you? Is that God talking to you, that other person? Or is it Satan? See, that's how Satan does. He uses people as his messengers because they bought into his paradigm. All right? Does that make sense? Yes. So that's by our words we'll be judged, and by our words we'll be condemned. All right? So let's finish. And Peter, I skipped a part here. So Peter turned around as soon as this is done. He's just done. And he sees the disciple whom Jesus loved. Who's that? John. The one who also leaned back on his bosom at the supper and said, Lord, who is the one who betrays you? That was earlier in the book of John. So Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, well, Lord, what about this man? Now, what's the question? You just told me how I'm going to die. What about John? He wants to know. Because this is scary, the fact that I'm going to die a martyr's death. Well, what about him? You got any information about John? And Jesus comes back and says, if I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me. Now, you have to love this answer. Because of this myth got started that John was going to live forever and never die. All right? Well, it says that. This saying went out among the brethren that Jesus, that disciple, would not die. But yet Jesus did not say that he would not die, but only if I want him to remain, what is that to you? Did Jesus say he would not die? He said, hypothetically, if I wanted to take him right to heaven like I did Enoch or Ezekiel, what's that to you? So here's the lesson. It doesn't matter what God calls one disciple to endure, and we don't compare our paths to the person next to us. My only job is what? Follow him. Some people have an easier path, and some people will have a more difficult path. Your only responsibility is follow your path in following Jesus. Don't compare yourself to others and say, well, it's not fair. Because to whom much is been given, much is required. And it's only reasonable that Peter is going to be a public face of the church, right? So who are they going to attack? Peter. Follow me. I don't know what your lot in life is, but the only answer is no matter how bad it is, love him and follow him. Yes?
Sometimes the easy path is not because it's hard to stay faithful and you've got to.
Because it's so easy. Yeah. Because when it's hard, I don't know if you heard that. The easy path sometimes not easy. Because when it's hard, you have to always make a choice. I'm going to love him. Am I going to follow him? When it's easy, you can drift without even know you're drifting. Right. All right. John's last words, and we're done. This is a disciple who testifies these things and wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. There are many other things which Jesus did, which are not written in detail, and I suppose the whole world would not contain the books that were that would be written. Is that a figure of speech? Yes. Could you put all the things Jesus did in a book? Yes. But he's saying, I only gave you 7 signs, and I gave you just these teachings. There's many more we could write about. But he's examining them like a trial lawyer would, or a judge. He's saying, I've written these things out, and I've testified to you, and my witness and testimony is true. Now you take this information, and you evaluate it, and said, who am I going to say Jesus is? Because when I look at this information, I look at his teachings, I look at his miracles, his death, burial, and resurrection, the only reasonable conclusion is he is who he said he was, the Son of God. And if you have a problem with that, then you're going to have to break down and contradict every miracle and every statement and everything that we've read in here. And only a reasonable person that would take this information would come to this conclusion. It's a reasonable conclusion. He is my Lord and he is my God. So that's how John ends. Yes.
Can I go back to
Please.
to a thought that you shared earlier where you were expressing who came to him, whether it was God or Satan?
Yes. Oh.
I started thinking that it's sort of like maybe a sport where I'm the player out on the court.
Yes.
I know that you've coached me in different ways over time, but when it comes right down to it, it's not God or Jesus that makes that play. I make
That's
that
right.
play. I
That's
do
right.
it. It's my decision.
That's right.
So if John was or wasn't, it wasn't so much Satan entering him at
Right.
that time. He made his own decisions
That's right.
based upon
Right.
the coaching that he had received in life.
That's right. It's all a choice. Am I going to follow him or not? That's right. All right. Thus ends the book of John. Gary.
Question on when you said that if everything he did was in a book, nobody would read it, is that because it was so much information?
Yeah, he didn't say they wouldn't read it. I think the King James says the whole world could contain it because there's so much.
Is it because it would be such a big book that people
Right.
would be scared to read it?
I'm not scared. It's just the volume of things he did was so large. It's a figure of speech. Like I told you 1,000,000 times, John's saying if we wrote everything Jesus said and did, the whole world couldn't contain all it. Because it's just, he was such a, can you imagine walking with Jesus one day? That's what he's trying to say. You would have been blown away. Just all the things you saw and did. Because truly he was full of grace and truth. And we behold God in the flesh. Yeah. I think that's all it's saying. Okay, thank you. You got songs?